Ask Historians Aloud. In this special episode series, we'll be bringing you curated audio content. This series features questions and answers from our subreddit, provided by our amazing Flair panel. This is a way of casting light on the great questions and answers that are happening every day at Ask Historians. To learn more, or for even more content, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Please also check out the Patreon, which goes towards supporting this endeavor.
How were maps made in the medieval times? Asked by user Celebreth. Answered by user terminus-trantor, Portuguese Empire, 1400 to 1580. I can give a more detailed answer focusing on portolan charts being made from the 13th to the 16th century and beyond. Those were the maps used in sailing and navigating, the ones explorers would use and make. I must mention that there were also other types of maps at the time, the so-called Mappa Mundi or world maps, and in the 15th century we have new maps appearing done in the Ptolemaic style, rediscovered with the translations of Ptolemy Geographia into Latin. Both of these were different types of map, made in distinctly different ways, and I won't be covering them here, but focus only on these sailing portolan charts. At the time I am talking about, sailing maps were not only made by longitude and latitudes. Measuring longitude was a major problem that wasn't solved well into the 18th century. But latitude wasn't purely trivial and wasn't measured in connection to ship navigation until the second half of the 15th century. First maps that actually had latitude information on them appeared only since 1500. Yet sailing charts depicting coast of Europe and Mediterranean existed since the late 13th century. Those maps, the portolan charts, were showing coastal and sailing information, and they were based on classifying 2 points in space by compass directions and distances between them. Portolan charts were usually drawn on vellum, but were also done on paper and other mediums. They are easily recognizable by the web of so-called rhumb lines on them. While at first they seem chaotic, they actually form a circle of 16 to 24 intersecting points in one center intersection. It is most likely that the rhumb lines were drawn before adding the coastal features, as we guessed from having examples of empty charts with drawn rhumb lines, but likely prepared for filling in, but never completed. The maps were actually surprisingly accurate, considering how much estimation and rounding the process of charting involved. Sailors had to accurately determine the compass direction the ship was heading and then judge the distance passed. As there wasn't a reliable way to measure ship speed back then, it was done by either estimating or guessing the speed and measuring the time passed with days or hours measured by hourglasses, or later by dropping a simple floating log from the front of the ship and counting how long it takes to pass the ship. Overall, all of it was unavoidably inaccurate, and the effects of magnetic declination making even the compass directions unreliable, and everything became even more of a mess. Still, as I said, the results were quite surprisingly accurate. The maps were continuously updated with new data added and old wrong data corrected. Two early examples, the Charta Pisana of the 13th century and the Catalan Atlas of the 14th century, has many corrections and resembles the real coast much more accurately, with many major and minor mistakes. Interestingly, these charts, while not terribly corresponding to latitude and longitude due to magnetic declination, were in fact completely accurate from compass bearings as long as magnetic declination was the same, although it changed through time. Following that chart, despite not looking like satellite images, would bring you to your desired location. Now so far I have only talked theoretically and in rough overview. Let's focus on early explorers and their map-making records. We will examine the who works of the period. The first, Duarte Pacheco, Piera Esmeraldas de Soto Orbis, and the Book of Francisco Rodriguez, both which are books on navigational matters and dated to the first decades of the 1500s. Looking at these two works, we see that using portolan charts was only one of the methods used by navigators to see and determine where they are going, and one possibly of secondary importance compared to the main way of passing information, verbal discussion, even orally or in written form. Duarte Pacheco's Piera Esmeralda is full of such descriptions, and here is a random quote of such passages. Quote, "By standing 4 lengths out to sea and sailing 15 leagues from southeast to Rio de Barbizas, you will come to the mouth of the Rio de Gambaya. The country from the Barbizas to the Gambaya is very low and woody, and the sea has many rocks and sand shallows, and at 10 fathoms one is 4 leagues from land and cannot see it owing to its lowness. This country, extending to the said Rio de Gambaya, is called Gurbandor. and it has a very large bay in which on the southeast forms a point running far into the sea. On this point there is a very large palm forest which covers 2 leagues or more, and out at sea a league from this point is a shallow of rock and sand which is called the shallow of Santa Maria, with not more than a fathom of water over it. It is very dangerous, and some ships have been wrecked there. This river is at 1 degree 5 minutes north of the equator. High tide flows northwest and southeast. Half a league to the north of this palm forest is the mouth of the river at the present time, and he who enters it must sail east by south. In the deepest part he will find 2.5 fathoms at low tide and 3.5 at full tide. A lot of information is given here, from the compass directions and distance as well as latitudes, but also all plethora of different details necessary for navigation, like description of coast and rivers, locations of shallows and rocks, tide times, depths of sea, etc. This verbal description was complemented with visual images, which we can divide into 2 large groups: charts of smaller and larger areas, and images of coast as seen from the ship. The former would be charts like above, but just of parts of the coast. The latter would depict key locations so the navigator can identify them and know how to proceed, especially if they have some tricky approach. Sadly, the images from the Duarte Pacheco Piero book were lost in history, and we only have his textual description, but we do have the images from Francisco Rodriguez books. Francisco Rodriguez was a pilot, often praised for his cartographic skills, who was present with the Portuguese in their first voyages to Southeast Asia, also known into China. In those voyages, he charted from them the new islands, and luckily his image were preserved together with his book. The 2 people I mention here, Duarte Pacheco Piero and Francisco Rodriguez, were highly skilled in drawing and cartography, and they were probably not representative of the average pilot. But from both of them we can see how the procedure of charting would go. The pilots would usually know all the information necessary: directions, distances, depths, tide, coast characteristics. They would also note the latitudes of the place, but at this point in time this measurement would usually be made on land, which was much more accurate than measuring latitude on sea in a rocking ship. If they had the skill, the pilots would draw smaller charts of the coast themselves. If they didn't, specifically trained cartographers would draw it from their notes. Later, makers of larger Portolan charts would compile info from these smaller charts into larger charts. Other map makers would copy their maps, add corrections if they knew of any, and then we would have the maps that we have today.
You've been listening to the Ask Historians podcast. Please support us at patreon.com/askhistorians. Find more history like this by following us on Twitter and Facebook, and by visiting us at askhistorians.reddit.com and ask hundreds of historians and enthusiasts anything you want to know about history.